Get your hands off me and tell me what law I broke." The words cut through the rain-soaked street with a calmness that didn't belong in the middle of flashing police lights and rising tension. Officer Ryan Cole barely looked at the woman before tightening his grip on her wrist and guiding her toward the squad car parked beneath the buzzing glow of a flickering traffic light. Rainwater rolled down the dark fabric of her coat, dripping onto the cracked pavement below, but she didn't resist. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. That alone irritated Ryan more than he wanted to admit. Most people argued. Most people panicked the second the handcuffs came out. But this woman just looked at him with steady eyes like she already knew something he didn't. Around them, drivers slowed to stare. A city bus hissed to a stop at the corner while people pressed their faces to fogged windows, watching the scene unfold beneath the red and blue reflections dancing across the wet street. Officer Derek Mills circled the woman's old gray sedan with a flashlight in hand, smirking to himself as rain tapped against the hood like impatient fingers. Expired plates. Failure to comply. Suspicious behavior. Derek muttered loudly enough for the small crowd gathering nearby to hear. That enough for you? Ryan let out a short laugh. More than enough. The woman remained silent for a moment, her breathing slow and controlled despite the cold rain soaking through her sleeves. She glanced briefly toward a young black boy standing under a laundromat awning across the street. He couldn't have been older than 12. His backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, while his mother held his arm tightly, fear written all over her face. The boy stared at the woman in handcuffs the same way children looked at storms rolling through neighborhoods that never seemed to get repaired. Quiet, helpless, expecting the worst. Ryan noticed the glance and shook his head. "Don't start trying to make this into something it's not," he snapped. "You were driving erratically." "I hit a pothole," the woman answered softly. Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion from a long drive and a longer life. Derek opened the trunk of the sedan and frowned. "Hey Ryan," he called. "You might want to see this." Ryan walked over, boots splashing through shallow puddles gathering along the curb. Inside the trunk sat a neatly folded navy blue police dress uniform protected inside clear plastic wrapping. Beside it rested a polished black case with an engraved silver badge barely visible beneath the rain-speckled light. Derek let out a low whistle. Well. Ryan's expression hardened immediately. "Looks like somebody's been collecting souvenirs." A few people in the crowd murmured. Someone raised a phone higher to record. The woman turned slowly toward the open trunk, and for the first time, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not panic, something closer to disappointment. Ryan stepped toward her again. "You impersonating an officer now?" The rain intensified, falling harder against the pavement, against the squad cars, against the silence slowly tightening around the entire street. The woman looked at the uniform for a long moment before lifting her eyes back to Ryan's face. Calm, unshaken, almost unbearably calm. "Officer," she said quietly, "you should be very careful about the assumptions you make tonight." Ryan smirked and reached for the handcuffs hanging from his belt while thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the city skyline. "Lady," he replied, "you're in no position to warn anybody." The metal handcuffs clicked shut around Naomi Brooks's wrists just as another wave of rain swept through the intersection, turning the street into a blur of reflected lights and distorted shadows. Officer Ryan Cole guided her toward the back of the squad car, while Derek Mills slammed the trunk of her sedan shut with unnecessary force. The crowd had grown larger now. A woman standing beneath a diner awning whispered something under her breath, while a teenager in a red hoodie kept filming with his phone held chest high. Naomi noticed all of it without reacting. Years of experience had taught her that people often revealed their true character when they believed nobody important was watching. Ryan opened the rear door of the cruiser and gestured impatiently. "Get in." Naomi lowered herself carefully into the seat, her wet coat brushing against the cracked leather upholstery. The inside of the car smelled faintly of coffee, rainwater, and old cigarette smoke buried deep in the fabric from years ago. Ryan shut the door harder than necessary before walking back toward Derek. Through the rain-speckled window, Naomi watched the two officers talking beside her car. Derek laughed first. Ryan followed a second later. Neither of them noticed the small boy across the street still staring at the cruiser with wide, nervous eyes. Naomi leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for just a moment. Nearly 300 miles. That was how far she had driven since sunrise to reach the city. 300 miles through heavy traffic, gas station coffee, and endless gray highways lined with dying winter trees. On the passenger seat of her sedan sat the printed transfer papers she had not even had the chance to bring inside yet. Her official reporting time at the precinct was 6 o'clock the next morning, less than 12 hours away. The irony settled heavily in her chest. She had spent most of her career investigating complaints against officers accused of misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of authority. Internal affairs had shown her the hidden side of policing, the side buried beneath polished press conferences and recruitment slogans. She had seen body camera footage that never made the news, heard apologies delivered too late to grieving families, sat across from officers who insisted they felt threatened every time the suspect happened to look like the young boy still standing under that laundromat awning tonight. Naomi opened her eyes again as thunder rolled low above the city skyline. The flashing lights painted moving streaks of red and blue across the ceiling of the cruiser. She thought briefly about her father. Marcus Brooks had worn a sanitation uniform for 27 years in South Baltimore. Every morning before sunrise, he used to tell her the same thing while tying his worn work boots near the apartment door. Never let bitterness become your identity. Even after being humiliated by supervisors. Even after being stopped by police 3 times in one summer while driving home from work. Even after the stress slowly damaged his heart long before 60. He still believed dignity mattered more than anger. Naomi swallowed hard and looked down at the cuffs around her wrists. Her father had died before seeing her become captain, before seeing the gold badge waiting inside that black case in her trunk. Outside, Ryan finally approached the cruiser again, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He opened the front driver's side door and slid into the seat with a tired sigh. Derek climbed into the passenger side moments later, still grinning to himself. "Dispatch says the station is packed tonight," Derek muttered while wiping rainwater from his forehead. Perfect timing. Ryan adjusted the rearview mirror slightly until his eyes met Naomi's reflection in the back seat. "You got anything you want to tell us before we get downtown?" Naomi held his gaze calmly despite the cold metal pressing against her wrists. Then quietly, almost gently, she answered, "That depends on whether either of you still cares about doing the right thing." The squad car rolled slowly through downtown Harbor City while rain streaked across the windshield in restless waves, blurring neon signs and traffic lights into smears of color that slid across Officer Ryan Cole's tired face. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with mechanical rhythm, filling the silence between the 3 people inside the cruiser. Derek Mills sat in the passenger seat scrolling through comments beneath one of the live stream videos already spreading online. "People really got nothing better to do," he muttered with a laugh. "Half these idiots are calling us racist already." Ryan kept his eyes on the road. "Let them talk." Naomi Brooks sat quietly in the back seat, shoulders relaxed despite the handcuffs still pressing cold against her wrists. Every few seconds, the passing city lights illuminated her face through the rain-covered windows, calm and unreadable like stone beneath moving water. Derek glanced back at her again. "You know what your problem is?" he asked. Naomi did not answer immediately. Derek smirked and continued anyway. "You carry yourself like you are better than people." Naomi looked out the window toward rows of dark brick buildings sliding past beneath the storm clouds. "Confidence and arrogance are not the same thing, officer." Derek rolled his eyes. "There it is. That tone." Ryan exhaled slowly through his nose. "Enough." But even he sounded distracted now. Something about Naomi unsettled him in ways he could not explain. Most suspects either acted terrified or furious once they were inside the cruiser. Naomi acted neither. She spoke carefully, watched everything, measured every word before saying it. It felt less like transporting someone under arrest and more like sitting across from a teacher waiting for students to realize they had made a mistake on their own. The cruiser turned beneath an overpass where old rainwater dripped steadily from cracked concrete overhead. Harbor City Police Headquarters finally came into view several blocks ahead, its tall gray structure standing beneath the storm like a tired monument worn down by decades of scandal and headlines. Naomi studied the building silently through the rain. She had read every report before accepting the transfer. Excessive force complaints. Internal investigations that disappeared without conclusions. Officers quietly reassigned instead of disciplined. A department losing the trust of the very neighborhoods it claimed to protect. Chief Howard Bennett had sounded exhausted during their final phone call 2 weeks earlier. "I need someone they cannot intimidate," he had told her. "Someone who still believes the badge means something." Naomi remembered sitting alone in her apartment after that call ended, staring at the framed photograph of her father on the bookshelf beside her window. She almost declined the position. Starting over in a city this broken felt impossible even for someone with 20 years in law enforcement. But then she remembered the names in the files. The mothers filing complaints nobody answered. The teenagers stopped 3 times a week for existing in the wrong zip code. The officers who still wanted to do honest work but had learned to stay silent because silence kept careers alive. The cruiser finally pulled into the underground garage beneath headquarters. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while rainwater dripped from exposed pipes along the concrete ceiling. Ryan parked beside a row of patrol vehicles and killed the engine. For a brief second, the entire garage fell strangely quiet except for the ticking sound of the hot engine cooling beneath the hood. Derek opened his door first. "Long night," he muttered while stepping out. Ryan remained still for another moment, staring forward at the stained concrete wall ahead of him. Then finally he opened his door and stepped into the cold garage air. Naomi waited patiently in the back seat until Ryan opened the rear door. "Watch your step," he said flatly. Naomi carefully stepped out onto the wet concrete floor. In the harsh garage lighting, the silver strands beginning to appear near Ryan's temples suddenly looked more noticeable, more tired. Naomi studied him briefly before speaking. "How long have you worked this district?" Ryan frowned slightly at the unexpected question. 15 years. Naomi nodded once. "Then somewhere along the way, you forgot the difference between suspicion and assumption." Ryan's jaw tightened immediately. Before he could answer, the distant elevator doors at the far end of the garage slid open with a metallic chime, and several officers stepped out carrying coffee cups and paperwork, stopping cold the second they noticed Naomi standing there in handcuffs. The small group of officers stepping out of the elevator slowed immediately when they saw Naomi Brooks standing in handcuffs beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the underground garage. One officer carrying a cardboard tray of coffee cups nearly stopped walking altogether. Another exchanged a quick glance with his partner before lowering his eyes toward the wet concrete floor. The silence that settled over the garage felt heavier than the rainstorm still echoing faintly above the city streets. Ryan Cole noticed the hesitation instantly and straightened his shoulders. "What?" he snapped. "You all forget how arrests work." Nobody answered right away. Naomi stood quietly between Ryan and Derek, rainwater still dripping from the edge of her coat onto the concrete beneath her shoes. The silver cuffs reflected the garage lights every time she moved her hands even slightly. One younger officer near the elevator stared at her for a second too long before quickly looking away. Naomi recognized the expression immediately. Uncertainty. Recognition trying to surface through confusion. Derek pushed the moment aside with a dismissive laugh. "Come on," he muttered while heading toward the security door leading inside the station. "Paperwork is already going to ruin my whole night." Ryan guided Naomi forward without touching her this time. The hallway inside headquarters smelled like old coffee, printer ink, and stale air trapped inside a building that never truly slept. Phones rang somewhere in the distance while officers moved between desks carrying reports and half-finished conversations. The station looked exactly like every overworked precinct Naomi had visited during the last 20 years. Fluorescent lights, gray walls, burnout hidden beneath uniforms and procedure. But beneath the surface, she could already feel something else here. Tension, the kind that lingered inside departments where trust had been damaged too many times to repair easily. As they walked past the front desk, several officers turned to stare openly. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. A television mounted high in the corner of the bullpen quietly replayed local news coverage about growing protests over police misconduct in neighboring districts. Ryan noticed Naomi glancing toward the screen. "People only see 10-second clips online," he muttered defensively. "They never see the whole situation." Naomi answered calmly. "Sometimes 10 seconds is enough." Derek rolled his eyes and pushed open the booking room door. "You always talk like that?" he asked. "Like some kind of motivational speaker?" Naomi stepped inside without responding. The booking area buzzed softly with overhead lights and outdated computers humming beneath layers of paperwork stacked across metal desks. A tired dispatcher typed reports behind thick glasses while a detention officer sipped lukewarm coffee near the fingerprint station. The room briefly quieted when everyone noticed Naomi in handcuffs. Ryan placed a folder onto the counter. "Traffic stop escalated," he said mechanically. "Need processing." The dispatcher barely glanced up at first. "Name?" Naomi answered herself before Ryan could speak. "Naomi Brooks." The dispatcher's fingers paused above the keyboard for half a second. Then she slowly typed the name into the system. The old desktop computer hummed loudly beneath the fluorescent lights. Derek leaned casually against the counter while checking his phone again. "Probably another fake ID situation," he muttered. Naomi remained perfectly still. The dispatcher frowned slightly at the screen. "That is strange." Ryan looked up immediately. "What?" The dispatcher adjusted her glasses and clicked the mouse twice more. "System access level is restricted." Derek smirked. "See? Told you she was hiding something." But the dispatcher did not laugh. Instead, her expression shifted into visible confusion. "No," she said quietly. "Restricted like command level restricted." Ryan stepped closer to the monitor. "What are you talking about?" Before the dispatcher could answer, a sharp electronic chime suddenly echoed through the bullpen outside. Then another. Every desktop computer inside the station lit up at once with the same incoming department-wide email notification. Conversations outside the room began fading one by one as officers stopped what they were doing to read their screens. The detention officer lowered his coffee cup slowly. Derek frowned toward the hallway. "Why is everybody stopping?" A strange stillness spread through the station like cold air moving beneath a locked door. Naomi lifted her eyes toward the booking room window where officers outside now stood frozen in place, staring silently at their computer monitors while the pale blue light reflected across their faces. The silence inside Harbor City Police headquarters deepened with every passing second as officers across the bullpen stared motionless at the glowing email notification on their computer screens. The pale blue light reflected against tired faces, coffee cups frozen halfway to mouths, unfinished conversations disappearing into the stale station air like smoke. Inside the booking room, Derek Mills frowned uneasily toward the hallway while the dispatcher slowly turned her monitor away from herself, eyes widening behind thick glasses. Ryan Cole stepped closer immediately. "What is it?" he demanded. The dispatcher swallowed once before speaking. "Department-wide announcement." Her voice sounded thinner now, uncertain. Ryan's jaw tightened. "About what?" But before she answered, another officer appeared in the booking room doorway carrying a folder under his arm. He stopped instantly the second he saw Naomi Brooks standing there in handcuffs. The color drained from his face so fast, it almost looked painful. "Oh my God," he whispered under his breath. Derek straightened from the counter. "What?" The officer did not answer him. His eyes stayed locked on Naomi. Then slowly, awkwardly, he lifted one trembling hand toward the computer monitor visible through the booking room glass. Ryan turned sharply toward the bullpen outside. Officers throughout the station were now staring directly toward the booking room. Some looked stunned. Others looked horrified. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Naomi stood perfectly still in the center of the room while fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Rainwater still darkened the shoulders of her coat. The silver cuffs around her wrists glinted beneath the harsh lighting. Calm, unshaken, the dispatcher finally cleared her throat. Effective immediately, she read carefully from the email on screen. Captain Naomi Brooks has been appointed commanding officer of Harbor City Police Department Internal Oversight Division. The words landed inside the room with crushing weight. Derek blinked once, then twice. "No," he said immediately. "That is not possible." Ryan stared at Naomi without speaking. Every sound inside the station seemed distant now. Phones ringing somewhere far away. Rain tapping against upper windows. The faint buzz of old fluorescent lights overhead. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward Ryan. There was no triumph in her expression. No anger. Only a quiet exhaustion that somehow felt worse. The younger officer near the doorway lowered his gaze immediately, like he could not bear to keep looking at her. Derek forced out an uneasy laugh. "This has to be some kind of mistake." Naomi finally spoke, her voice low and steady enough to cut through the silence without effort. "It is not." Ryan's breathing slowed visibly as realization began settling across his face piece by piece. The expired registration excuse. The assumptions. The livestream video already spreading online. The handcuffs. Every decision suddenly looked different under the cold light of consequence. Naomi glanced briefly toward the bullpen, where several officers now stood completely frozen beside their desks. "You asked earlier if I thought I was better than people," she said quietly to Derek. "No. I simply expected to be treated like one." Nobody responded. The words settled heavily into the room. Derek's face reddened beneath the fluorescent lighting, while Ryan remained motionless beside the counter, eyes fixed somewhere near the floor now. Then suddenly the booking room door opened again. Chief Howard Bennett stepped inside, still wearing a rain-soaked overcoat, silver hair damp from the storm outside. The moment he saw Naomi standing there in cuffs, something in his expression collapsed. Not surprise. Disappointment. Deep and immediate. He removed his glasses slowly, staring first at Naomi, then at Ryan and Derek. The room stayed silent enough to hear water dripping from the hem of his coat onto the tile floor. Bennett finally spoke in a voice so calm it made the tension worse. "Tell me," he said carefully, "which one of you thought this was acceptable?" Nobody answered. Ryan opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out. Naomi remained standing quietly in the center of the room while officers throughout the station watched through the glass walls, witnessing the moment their entire department shifted beneath their feet. Chief Howard Bennett stepped fully into the booking room and closed the door behind him with deliberate slowness, sealing the silence inside like pressure building beneath deep water. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly while rain continued tapping against distant windows somewhere above the station. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe too loudly. Naomi Brooks remained standing in the center of the room with her wrists still cuffed in front of her, her soaked coat dark beneath the harsh lighting. Ryan Cole stared at the floor beside her feet, while Derek Mills shifted uncomfortably against the counter, his confidence draining away minute by minute. Bennett removed his wet overcoat and draped it carefully over the back of a chair without taking his eyes off the scene in front of him. "Take the cuffs off her," he said quietly. Ryan reacted immediately, fumbling slightly for the key attached to his belt. His fingers no longer looked steady. Naomi watched him calmly while the metal cuffs finally clicked open around her wrists. The sound echoed through the silent room far louder than it should have. For a brief moment, Naomi rubbed the faint red marks left against her skin, but said nothing. Bennett exhaled slowly through his nose. "Captain Brooks was supposed to arrive tomorrow morning," he said, his voice controlled but heavy with disappointment. "I did not expect the welcoming committee to start tonight." Derek lowered his eyes. Ryan still could not look directly at Naomi. Outside the booking room glass, officers across the bullpen remained frozen beside desks and computer screens, pretending to work while clearly listening to every word. The station no longer sounded normal. Conversations had faded into whispers. Even the phone seemed quieter now. Naomi looked toward the bullpen for a second before turning back to Bennett. "Chief," she said calmly, "I would prefer this stays professional." Bennett gave a bitter nod. Professional ended the moment my new captain was brought through booking. Rainwater dripped slowly from Naomi's coat sleeve onto the tile floor between them. The small sound somehow deepened the silence further. Ryan finally forced himself to speak. "Captain Brooks," he began carefully, "I did not know who you were." Naomi looked at him for several long seconds before answering. "That is exactly the problem." Ryan swallowed hard. The words hit him harder than shouting ever could have. Naomi stepped slowly toward the booking room window overlooking the bullpen. Officers quickly looked away the second she glanced in their direction. She watched them quietly for a moment. Tired faces, burned-out expressions, fear mixed with shame spreading through the room like smoke. Then her eyes stopped briefly on a young black female officer standing near the dispatch desk. The officer looked no older than 25. Nervous, silent. Naomi recognized that look too. Someone trying to survive inside a culture that punished honesty faster than misconduct. Bennett moved beside Naomi near the glass. "The mayor demanded reforms after the last incident," he said quietly enough that only the people inside the room could hear. "Community trust is collapsing. The city council wanted an outsider." Naomi kept her eyes on the bullpen. "I know why I was hired." Bennett hesitated before speaking again. "What happened tonight?" This department cannot survive many more moments like that. Naomi finally turned back toward Ryan and Derek. Neither officer looked capable of defending themselves anymore. The live stream videos were already spreading across the city. Every person in this station knew it. Every officer watching through the glass understood the same thing at the same time. This was no longer just a traffic stop. It had become a mirror. Naomi studied Ryan carefully before speaking again. Do you know what people remember most about encounters with police? Ryan remained silent. Naomi answered her own question softly. How powerless they felt. The fluorescent lights reflected across the booking room window, turning the bullpen beyond it into overlapping shadows and pale reflections. Somewhere deeper inside headquarters, a printer suddenly started running, spitting paper into an empty tray with mechanical rhythm. Nobody moved to collect it. Naomi glanced down briefly at the silver captain's badge still sitting inside the black case on the counter nearby, untouched, waiting. Then she lifted her eyes toward the station once more, and for the first time since entering the building, the exhaustion on her face became visible beneath the calm. The booking room remained painfully quiet after Naomi Brooks's words settled over the station like heavy rain clouds refusing to move. Nobody inside Harbor City Police Headquarters seemed certain where to look anymore. Some officers stared at paperwork they were no longer reading. Others avoided eye contact completely, pretending to focus on glowing computer screens while tension spread through the bullpen in slow, invisible waves. Chief Howard Bennett stood beside the counter with both hands resting against the edge of the metal surface, exhaustion carved deeply into the lines around his eyes. Ryan Cole remained near the doorway, shoulders stiff, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lighting. Derek Mills had stopped talking entirely. For the first time all night, the room no longer belonged to the loudest voices. Naomi slowly picked up the black presentation case resting on the counter beside her. Water still glistened faintly on her coat sleeve as she opened it carefully. Inside, the polished captain's badge reflected the harsh overhead lights in cold silver flashes. The room watched silently. Naomi studied the badge for a moment without speaking. 20 years in law enforcement. 12 internal affairs investigations. 3 cities. Hundreds of interviews with officers insisting they followed procedure while families sat across from her carrying grief too heavy for procedure to explain. She remembered every face, every trembling voice, every child sitting quietly beside a parent trying not to cry inside police station waiting rooms. Naomi closed the case gently. Do you know why departments fail? She asked softly without looking at anyone directly. Nobody answered. Because eventually officers stop seeing people and start seeing categories instead. The words landed heavily in the stillness. Ryan lowered his eyes again. Naomi turned slowly toward him. Tonight you did not stop a dangerous suspect, she continued calmly. You stopped a tired black woman driving an old sedan through a wealthy district after dark and decided that alone justified suspicion. Ryan's jaw tightened painfully. Captain Brooks, he said carefully, I made a judgment call. Naomi nodded once. Exactly. The station remained silent enough to hear the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Chief Bennett finally spoke. Ryan has served this department for 15 years. Naomi looked toward Bennett without anger. And how many complaints? Bennett hesitated. That hesitation answered the question before words ever could. Naomi glanced toward the bullpen window where officers still pretended not to listen. People notice patterns long before departments admit them, she said quietly. Derek shifted uncomfortably beside the counter. So what now, he muttered. Naomi turned toward him fully for the first time since entering the station. Now, she answered softly. You decide whether tonight becomes another buried report or the beginning of accountability. Derek looked away immediately. Ryan finally lifted his eyes toward Naomi again, and for the first time all evening, his expression no longer carried defensiveness. Only shame. I never thought of myself as racist, he admitted quietly. Naomi's face softened slightly, though not with forgiveness. More with sadness. Most people do not. The word sat heavily inside the room. A younger female officer standing near the bullpen doorway lowered her gaze as if the conversation was reaching places inside herself she was not prepared to confront. Naomi noticed her immediately. Fear. Silence. Moral exhaustion. She had seen it in good officers before. Officers who entered the profession wanting to help people and slowly learned that questioning bad behavior could end careers faster than misconduct itself. Naomi stepped closer to the booking room window again, looking out over the station floor beneath the pale fluorescent lights. "I did not come here to destroy this department," she said quietly. "I came because somewhere beneath all this fear and defensiveness, there are still officers who remember why they put on the badge in the first place." Nobody interrupted her. Rain continued tapping softly against distant windows above the station, while the city outside moved through another storm-filled night, unaware that something inside Harbor City Police Department had quietly cracked open. Naomi looked down briefly at the faint marks still visible around her wrists from the handcuffs. Then she lifted her eyes toward Ryan one final time. "The hardest part of leadership," she said calmly, "is accepting that power does not reveal character. It exposes it." The storm outside Harbor City Police Headquarters had begun to weaken by the time the tension inside the station finally shifted from shock into something heavier and far more uncomfortable. Reality. Officers moved more quietly now through the bullpen beneath the pale fluorescent lights. Their conversations reduced to murmurs that disappeared the second Naomi Brooks walked past the booking room window. The livestream videos had already spread across local news pages and community forums. Everyone inside the building knew it. Every glance carried the same unspoken question. How had things gone this far again? Naomi stood beside the counter with the black badge case resting near her hand, while Chief Howard Bennett quietly spoke with command staff near the hallway. Ryan Cole remained near the doorway, shoulders tense, staring at the floor as though searching for words he could not organize properly. Derek Mills had disappeared into silence altogether, avoiding eye contact with almost everyone now. The station no longer felt like a place filled with authority. It felt like a building forced to confront itself under bright, unforgiving light. Naomi slowly removed her soaked coat and folded it carefully over the back of a chair. The faint marks around her wrists remained visible beneath the fluorescent lighting. She noticed several younger officers glance toward them before quickly looking away again. Shame moved differently through a room than anger did. Anger shouted. Shame avoided mirrors. Ryan finally stepped forward after several long minutes, his boots echoing softly against the tile floor. The bullpen quieted almost immediately. Naomi turned toward him calmly. Ryan looked older now than he had during the traffic stop, more tired. The confidence that once sharpened every sentence had disappeared beneath something far more human and difficult to carry. Regret. He swallowed once before speaking. "Captain Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Nobody in the bullpen pretended not to listen anymore. Naomi remained silent. Ryan took another slow breath. "What happened tonight should not have happened. I made assumptions before I had facts. I let experience turn into prejudice without realizing how far it had gone." His voice wavered slightly near the end. Derek looked down immediately. Naomi studied Ryan carefully while rainwater continued sliding down the station windows high above the bullpen. "Do you know what makes bias dangerous?" she asked softly. Ryan shook his head once. Naomi answered without raising her voice. "It convinces good people that harmful behavior is reasonable." The station stayed silent except for the distant hum of printers and dispatch radios. Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing every word with visible difficulty. "I thought I was protecting the city," he admitted quietly. Naomi's expression softened slightly again, though sorrow still outweighed forgiveness. Fear often disguises itself as protection. Ryan looked down at his own hands for a moment. "I cannot undo tonight." "No," Naomi replied gently. "But you can decide what kind of officer you become after it." The words settled across the bullpen with surprising weight. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances. Others stared openly now, hearing a conversation many of them had likely needed for years. Chief Bennett stopped speaking with command staff and quietly watched from the hallway without interrupting. Naomi walked slowly toward the booking room window again, looking out over the station floor beneath the harsh white lighting. She noticed the young black female officer still standing near dispatch, nervous, silent, watching carefully. Naomi recognized herself in her a little. Younger, hopeful, unsure whether integrity could survive inside systems built on silence. Naomi turned back toward Ryan one final time. "The badge is not permission to control people," she said calmly. "It is a responsibility to protect their dignity." especially when they cannot protect it themselves. Ryan's eyes lowered again. He nodded once, slower this time. Real understanding finally replacing defensiveness. Naomi reached for the black presentation case beside her and held it carefully in both hands. The polished silver badge inside reflected against the fluorescent lights like cold morning sunlight after a storm. Around the bullpen, officers slowly returned to their desks, but nothing inside Harbor City Police Department felt the same anymore. Something invisible had shifted. Not through punishment, through exposure. And in the quiet that followed, the station no longer sounded like a place full of power. It sounded like a place finally learning humility. By the time morning light finally pushed through the rain clouds over Harbor City, the storm that had swallowed the city overnight had faded into cold mist drifting between buildings downtown. Inside police headquarters, the fluorescent lights still hummed softly above the bullpen, but something about the station felt different now. Quieter, slower, like the entire building had stayed awake thinking about things nobody wanted to say out loud before tonight. Naomi Brooks stood alone near the tall front windows outside the captain's office, watching pale sunlight reflect against wet streets 12 floors below. The city looked washed clean after the storm, though she knew better than most people that some stains took years to remove. Behind her, officers moved carefully through the station preparing for morning briefing. Conversations stayed low. Computer keyboards clicked softly beneath the steady buzz of old heating vents pushing warm air through the building. Naomi held a framed photograph in her hands. The glass was slightly scratched with age, but the image inside remained clear. Her father stood smiling beside a sanitation truck in his orange work jacket, lunchbox hanging from one hand, while early morning sunlight touched the side of his face. Marcus Brooks had hated having his picture taken. Naomi traced her thumb gently along the edge of the frame before setting it carefully on the shelf inside her new office. A quiet knock came against the open doorway behind her. Ryan Cole stood there wearing a freshly pressed uniform, though exhaustion still shadowed his face beneath the sharp collar and polished badge. He hesitated before stepping fully inside. "Captain Brooks," he said quietly. Naomi turned toward him calmly. Ryan held a folded piece of paper in one hand. "I submitted a request for reassignment pending review," he explained. "I figured it was appropriate." Naomi studied him silently for several seconds. The anger she might have carried hours earlier had faded into something steadier now. "Clarity. Why did you become a police officer?" she asked softly. Ryan seemed surprised by the question. He looked down briefly before answering. "My father was one. Small town outside Richmond. He used to stop every morning for coffee at the same diner, knew everybody by name." A faint sad smile crossed his face. "People trusted him." Naomi nodded slowly. "And somewhere along the way, you stopped trying to be trusted and started trying to be feared." Ryan lowered his eyes. Neither spoke for a moment. Outside the office windows, sunlight broke fully through the clouds at last, casting pale gold reflections across the wet city streets below. Naomi finally stepped toward her desk and placed the reassignment paper back into Ryan's hands. "I am not interested in symbolic punishment," she said calmly. Ryan looked up in surprise. Naomi continued, "I am interested in whether people are capable of changing once they are forced to confront themselves honestly." The station beyond the office remained unusually quiet. Several officers passing through the bullpen slowed subtly near the doorway, listening without appearing to. Ryan swallowed hard. "I do not know if I deserve another chance." Naomi glanced briefly toward the photograph of her father on the shelf. Neither did many people he believed in. Ryan looked at the paper in his hands for a long moment before carefully folding it again. "Thank you, Captain." Naomi shook her head once. "Do not thank me yet. Earn it." Ryan nodded slowly and stepped back toward the doorway. Before leaving, he paused one final time. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "the city needed someone like you long before tonight." Naomi did not answer immediately. She simply watched him walk back into the bullpen where officers were gathering for morning briefing beneath the soft white station lights. Some looked nervous, others thoughtful, but for the first time since entering the building, Naomi noticed something else in the room too. Hope. Small, fragile, but present. She picked up her captain's badge from the desk and fastened it carefully to the front of her uniform. The silver caught the morning sunlight spilling through the office windows, reflecting softly against the walls around her. Then Naomi Brooks stepped out into the bullpen as the station slowly fell silent around her, and somewhere beneath the sound of radios, footsteps, and distant traffic waking outside, Harbor City Police Department finally sounded less like a fortress and more like a place trying to remember what service was supposed to mean.